Good evening to all the supporters of science, technology, University of Nova Gorica, and let me use the word fans of the scientific evenings here at Zemuno. I would like to specially welcome today in our audience His Excellency the Ambassador of Sweden, Mr. John Haggard, and the member of the European Parliament, Gospod Lojze Peterle. Despite you two and other honorable guests, today we have a very special person here with us, a person who is a scientist and who also devoted part of his life to human space flights, Dr. Christer Fuglesang. Please.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Well, Dr. Fuglesang was born in Sweden, where he studied physics and obtained his PhD in particle physics, so he has chosen the same profession as I. After his PhD, he spent most of his research career at CERN in Geneva at the European Laboratory for Particle Physics, actually a place where every particle physics should be. If you are not there, you are not a serious particle physicist. He started to work in UA5 experiment, and then later on he joined CEPILIER, and that was the period where we first met, and when we shared the joy of that beautiful experiment, measuring and the small differences in the behavior of the matter and antimatter. And in particular, I think we were excited by discovering the time reversal non-invariance, which in simple words mean that also in the micro world you have an arrow of time. Well, in 1991, by some strange coincidence, we both left CERN, and we both returned to our own countries, Christer to Sweden, where he got a position at the University of Stockholm, but he didn't stay long there, I think, for a few years, and after that he decided to become an astronaut. Don't ask me why, but probably we'll have the opportunity to ask him later on. He was first trained at the Star City near Moscow as part of the ESA and the Russian space program. He was, of course, very successful, and if I remember correctly, you got the title of the Soyuz Return Commander. But after that, as usually in politics happens, the policy changed, and the ESA decided not to support anymore the Russian space program, but to join NASA. And Christer was probably forced, in some quotation marks, to leave Russia, to leave the Russian program, and to join the Johnson Space Center in Houston as a member of the NASA and ESA astronaut crew. Well, he has to wait quite long to be launched to up to the International Space Station. But the reason was mainly that just before their mission, the Columbia had the disaster and all the space flights were postponed for quite some time. But finally, last December, the Christer was, as a member of the STS-116 crew, he was launched to the International Space Station, where he did, I don't know, 4 spacewalks. Three, sorry. And I think he completed his mission very successfully. He safely returned back, and he is today here with us to share his feelings, to share his adventure with us. Please, the floor is
Thank
yours.
you. Well, yeah, so I call this talk a journey to the International Space Station and space federation and light flashes. So it's first part, actually the very first part will be fast now for Daniel already talked a little about my background. And then will be a video showing the flight itself. And then last half I will talk about the research I've been doing kind of a little bit on the side the last 10 years, while I've also been mainly working to get up to space. So, well, this is how it looked like almost half a year ago. However, this journey started a long time ago, and actually, as Danilo started, it started when I was at CERN and worked at this CERN experiment, where, as mentioned, met Danilo. And while I was there, I went to Stockholm for a conference to talk about the CERN experiment. And then one evening, I went to an old friend of mine, and then he said, "Hey, by the way, I found a new job for you. They're looking for astronauts." I said, "Oh, hey, I have a great job. It can't be anything more fun than being a scientist." But when he said it was an astronaut, I thought he was joking. But 2 days later, he gave me this. I don't know if we can read it, but it says, "European Space Agency is looking for up to 10 astronauts. And you just had to call the Swedish Space Agency." However, it was not so much just to call. And then started a long, long process, which took almost 2 years, until I was one of 6 Europeans who became the second group of astronauts in ESA. We actually more than doubled the number of astronauts in Europe by doing this. There were 3 before, and now it became 6. No, I mean 9. And as mentioned, after being 1 year at the European Astronaut Center, EAC, in Cologne, I was sent to Russia, which was a bigger surprise, because before that I was supposed to go to America. So trained in Russia for 3 years. Here we're doing some egress training in case the Soyuz lands in the water. You have to know how to jump out. However, in September 1995, when the spaceship, the Soyuz, launched to the Mir space station, I had to stay back on ground because I was the backup. I was not the one choosing to go to space. So this is actually a picture of the Soyuz rocket rolling out to the launch pad in Baikonur. Instead, I came to Johnson Space Center. I was sent there, rather, by ESA to train with NASA. This is an aerial picture of the Space Center, southeast part of Houston. And there I joined a much bigger astronaut class. It was actually the biggest astronaut class ever NASA had, 44 people, 9 foreigners. And I'm still up in the upper left corner there. And there was so many people, it was very crowded in the offices after we came there, so they called us the sardines. And then someone came with a very good slogan, "For sardines, space is no problem." So that's trained. This is a picture of one of the biggest training halls, full-scale models and simulators, so the space station in the foreground, and in the background you can actually see the full-scale model of the shuttle also. Finally, in February 2002, I was assigned to a crew. And we introduced the people here because you will see them later in the video. And this was actually not the crew how it looked like in 2002, because after the accident, which happened in 2003 with Columbia, they changed some of the crew compositions. But this is the people who flew. Commander Mark Polanski, called Roman, was the famous director Roman Polanski. He had flown once before. The pilot, Billy Offline, Billy O called, first flyer. The most experienced on board, Robert Corbin, called Beamer, who had flown twice and done 3 spacewalks, and he was a spacewalk lead on this flight. And he actually made 4 spacewalks during our flight. We got an extra unplanned one. And he has the record. He's the only one now done 4 spacewalks during one shuttle flight. Nick Patrick with the British origin, and Joni Higginbottom, Sunny Williams. She's well known here because she has some Slovene origin, and also Indian. And she's still up there. She didn't have her return ticket with her, so we left her. And me there. And since I was, my main task was to do spacewalks, did a lot of training in the huge water pool there called the Neutron Buoyancy Laboratory. We have a full-scale models of the space station, or parts of the space station and the shuttle. And we train this in the pool because you go there, down there in a spacesuit, done for water, and you can balance it so you, to some extent you can move around like in weightlessness. All the time when you're there, by the way, you fly around with these nice aircrafts. It's good training, but it's also a transport mean for us. So we train in Houston, but all the real stuff is in Cape Kennedy in Florida. So fly back and forth, takes just over an hour with this airplane. And this is actually a picture of myself. I took the last training session we had finished in Florida just 3 weeks before launch. I had a kind of general final repetition of the launch. And this I took when we came back for the launch. So we fly with our own aircrafts from Houston to Florida before the launch, made a tour around the launch complex. So here is Discovery on the launch pad, waiting to launch a few days later. And now we'll start the movie. We were actually supposed to launch on the 7th of December, and we strapped in, but then the weather didn't cooperate. So we waited there for 3 hours in the shuttle, and then we had to go back. 2 days later, in the morning, the weather actually seemed to be even worse. But they said, well, let's try anyhow. So here we come out of the crew quarters with us orange suits, waving, going into this bus, which takes us up to the rocket, and there's nobody there except us. And we go up with the elevator and get into the space shuttle. And there's actually 7 people helping us getting strapped in. And this is Sunny, by the way, getting strapped in. And then you are there waiting, hoping the weather will be okay. And finally, we got all the go, and the main engine starts. You still cannot be sure that you will go, because it's 6 seconds for them to run up, and only when they are okay and run up, this starts and off you go. This happened actually at this thing that stopped 1 second before it started. But we came off, it was shaking, it was a wonderful feeling. We had the visors down, but I'm sure at least all the 5 of us never flown before. We were shouting and inside our helmets. It's very shaky the first 2 minutes while these boosters are burning. They together produce 44 million horsepower. And if you are a spectator, it gets light as in daylight. It was the first night launch after the accident. So it's the first night in more than 4 years. So after 2 minutes, when these 2 boosters are finished burning, they separate. They fall down in the Atlantic and actually gets picked up and reused. And it gets much calmer inside. And now we fly away. This is a picture of one of the boosters seeing us flying away. Here's the tank and here's the 3 main engines. And now it's not as shaky anymore. It's much quieter. And the G-forces slowly starts to build up more and more. And finally, you have 3 Gs. You weigh 3 times more than normal. So that means I was some 230 kilograms. It's actually a little bit heavy to lift your arm. But then, 8.5 minutes after launch, it's in a second, the engine stops, and you're in 0 G, in weightlessness. And you can get out and share and just float around. And for several minutes, we were just laughing and happy as children. But we had to start to work. And we had to first fix it from a rocket to somewhere we could live for 2 weeks. And that took 6 hours. Then we went to bed. And the next day, the most important work was to check that the shuttle didn't got any hits, damage during the launch, that the heat shields didn't get hit. Because that was happened with Columbia. The following day, the third day in space, gets close to the space station. This is sped up by the factor of 3, by the way. It goes fast, but not that fast. We do a flip in front of the space station, and they take picture of us, which is sent down to ground to verify there's no damage on the heat shields. And it wasn't fun. So here is we flying. Here's our payload bay. We have a piece here for the space station. Coming in over Chile, coast of Chile, the space shuttle comes up in front of the shuttle and then kind of backs in towards the shuttle, and that's how you dock. That's the docking port of the station. And here's our docking port. And it's flown by the commander manually all the time now. And you will see him there. And here's the station coming in, or rather we are coming up towards the station. And once we docked, we check there is no air leaks, and then we can open the hatch to the space station. We floated in and we say hi to the 3 very happy guys in there. It was the Russian Misha, the American Mike was the commander, and the German ESA astronaut Thomas right there. And that's Thomas there, he was the happiest of everybody because he had been there longer for 5.5 months, and we were his bus back. And he was pretty eager to come back, I think. All 10 on the space station waving to the cameras on the ground, and then we started to do a lot of work again. However, before going into that work, this is a tour through the whole complex. We're starting on the so-called flight deck, the top of the deck of the space shuttle. Got through there, the whole, this is a ladder which you don't use in space. Here is the toilet. This is the mid-deck where you eat, there are lockers here for our food, our clothes, etc. Do a little turn in under where we were before and go in a tunnel aft, towards the aft of the space shuttle. If we're going up, we would go to the station. But now we continue aft to a kind of special cargo locker we had called Space Hab. Here we had tons of material which was going to be moved into the station. And Joni was the load master. She had a horrible task to keep all organized. And here she's saying, you're not allowed to show this video because she hadn't fixed her hair yet in the early morning. So of course we show it. Now we went back to the tunnel, but now turned up and going into the space station. And this is the American part of the space station first, at the front. And here's stuff we are going to bring back with us. That's Sunny working at the robotics station. Continue to the next module. It's called the node because you can connect things in every direction. Here's Mike, the Lopez Alegria, the commander. He's working upside down. We take a little peek into the airlock. From here we prepared and made the spacewalks. Here, going to an adapter which connects the American part of the space station, or the non-Russian, to the Russian part of the space station. And the whole thing is a set of cylinders kind of connected in a long row, basically. And the Russians have 2 cylinders by now. The most interesting is the aft one called the service module, or Zvezda, star in Russian. Maybe the same as Slovenian, I don't know. And here, this is, I think, the most nice part of the space station, although it looks kind of busy. Here is Thomas photoing me, and here is his cayuta where he was living. So, well, after the docking and waving to the camera, we immediately started to work again. And this is the piece which we were going to mount on the space station. It was called a P5, P stands for port, and it was part of a huge truss which is there to hold solar arrays. It's actually one of the smallest pieces in the whole truss, but for us it was most important, of course. It's brought up by the robotic arm which the shuttle has, and it's giving over to the robotic arm of the station. And when that's done, we are ready to prepare the spacewalk. And this is Billy, O, and Mike helping Beamer and me getting into the inner airlock so we can go out to spacewalk. Here they closed the inner hatch. We evacuated the air, opened the outer hatch, and Beamer is now getting out into the outer space. And there's my niece there, kind of coming after him. So the first task on the first spacewalk was to mount this P5 at the end of the truss for solar arrays. And here it's coming up on this robotic arm. I'm working there, but it's sped up. So there's Joni and Sunny working the robotic arm from the inside, but they didn't have any cameras in view, so they had to kind of trust us that we were guiding them. And you see, we could guide them correctly because it's actually found a hole, so they could fit together properly, and then we could drill the bolts and put them together. And this is me down there, and this Beamer using his bolt driver. After this first task, we had a second main task on this first spacewalk, and it was to change the camera on the outside, on the very other far end of this truss. It was a huge walk, some 80 meters from one side to another. And here's the bad old camera, and which we took inside. There was 2 more spacewalks scheduled for this flight. And the main task there was to actually rewire the space station electrical system. Because up to then, all power had come from solar rays, which are still on a temporary position. The flight before us put up one new pair of solar rays, and now it's time to kind of get them connected to the station. But you had to do it in 2 steps, because you have to turn off the power to reconnect, and you cannot turn off the whole power of the station at once. So Beamer and I did 1/2 during the second spacewalk, and it really was a lot of just connectors like this. You unplug them and plug them back again. But they were very hard, so it was unexpectedly hard. The second task we had on this second spacewalk was to move some carts, which was on a rail here, which goes on the truss. And there's a kind of a wagon there, and it was on the wrong side of the wagon for future work. So I was on the robotic arm holding it, and was moved over by Sonny, and then put him back on the rail. And being on that arm, that was the most beautiful view I had on the whole time up in space. The third spacewalk was made by Beamer and Sonny, and again they did all these connectors, and then they had one more task, and it was to move some extra shields, which were just a couple of days ago finally put outside the part of the Russian module Siesta, because the Americans figured out that they hadn't put enough shielding on it to protect from micrometeorites and orbital debris. Russians didn't agree, so the Americans had to pay for it, but that's fine. So that was brought up on our shuttle and put over there. Well, so we had this solar array, which was supposed to get retracted on the 5th day, the day between the first and second spacewalk. Well, it didn't work. You had car map, 80 folds, been kind of out like this for 6 years, and then they tried to fold it. Does it work? Well, not always, and it didn't work for us here. So what was supposed to take an hour, we worked a full day, and we couldn't get more than, well, about halfway. So at the end of the third spacewalk, Ground told the Beamer and Sonny to go up to the solar array and shake it and see if that helps. Because there was a wire there and was some rings that's going through, and thought, well, maybe shake it loose, it would work. It did help a little bit, but not enough. So then they told us at the end here that, all right, guys, you get one more spacewalk, one more day in space. And I was happy because I was the one, me and Beamer was the one who did the last 4 spacewalk. And for that, we prepared some special tools Ground had kind of suggested, taped together things that have some long stick to poke with, and isolated it with isolation tape, because this has 160 volts on it, the solar array, so better be careful, and DC also. After many hours of work and inventing new things how to do it, it finally worked. And this is from the control center in Houston.
Yes. No one has
He was the main guy doing it, and he's the flight director. They were very happy, and we were happy. Everyone was happy. And one day extra in space also. Well, did not only this kind of work, I had the chance to work a little bit with one experiment there called Althea. I'll tell you more about it later. So I can just tell you, I was here for 1.5 hours, and while the other was working behind me. And they think that Althea is the Swedish word for sleep, while I was doing serious science there. Anyhow, this is workout you can do, real workout, and you can play sometime. Here's Nick and I throwing a frisbee through the tunnels. Not too easy. And if you don't have a frisbee to spin, you take a crewmate and spin her. And Joni was okay with this because I'd fixed her hair by this time. Another thing which is fun to play with in steering weightlessness is water, which you kind of get it out. It's like this bubble that's floating around, and you can play with it. Like put a Swedish candy into it and see how that tastes. Another thing, you feed each other candy. That's very fun. However, Nick had some British thing called Marmite, and no one wanted that, so he had to feed himself. Otherwise, the way we eat most is out of these plastic bags, which you dried food in, you put water in it, you cut it open after 10 minutes, and you can eat it. Once during our time up there, we could gather all 10 of us together in the Russian service module and have a little party, and people brought their own food, especially with them. I had some Swedish food. Moose sausage was very popular. After 8 days on a station, it was time to say goodbye. We hugged each other, and everyone made sure they were on the right side of the hatch. In particular, Thomas was very keen to be on our side. Sunny didn't have a ticket. We left her. And then we closed the hatches and backed off. And as tradition has it, it's the pilot, William offline here, who's flying at this time. So he's backing off to about 200 meters, and then we fly half a turn around the space station and got these beautiful pictures. And they got pictures of us. It's empty here now, so we did leave this P5. And actually, that's where P5 is. This is the truss I've been talking about, and here are the modules inside. And here's the solar array. Well, it was, rather, the one we retracted. It's against Earth. We had 3 more days in space, and with 3 more things to do, or 3 small experiments to deploy. They called it even pico satellites, were supposed to be so small. And this one was most interesting because it was pieces, finally 5 pieces, slowly drifting apart and slowly leaving us. And that one in particular will study the atmosphere composition at this very high altitude. We were actually up to 360 kilometers altitude. And after that, it was time to get home, and we did final preparations. Here, Joe and I are closing the payload bay doors, which is one of the last things to do, because inside here you have radiators, which radiates the heat you generate on board. And if you don't have them, you will soon build up heat inside. Then we could dress up in our spacesuits. Beamer takes the last bite before landing. Joan is actually happy to get back, thumbs up. However, we actually did not know where to land or when we would come back, because the weather was not good in Florida. Was kind of shaky in California, which is the normal backup site. And because we only had 1 day left in space, we kind of cut short with our extra day. They even brought up New Mexico, which is a desert to land in. We got 1 extra orbit around Earth, and then just a few minutes before we were going to actually go to California, I said, well, it seems to be a little opening in the weather in Florida, let's go to Florida. And we come in here, when you pass under the speed of sound, you go subsonic. The commander takes the stick himself and flies manually. And he has a heads-up display he can follow. This is speed in knots, and this is the altitude in feet. And this is the indicator, how it's supposed to fly. 300 feet, roughly, the landing gears gets out. This push button is the pilot has to push, his most important job during the whole space flight. And Roman makes a perfect landing. He himself says it was 2 knots too fast, compared around 200 knots, so almost 400 kilometers an hour. It comes fast. And we were back there, I think it was 12 days, 20 hours and 45 minutes or something like that, 203 orbits around Earth. And that's what Roman likes to call our little winter holiday. So, now, after I show you this stuff to go into space, I'll talk a little bit about what kind of science I've been doing, and I was actually even lucky enough to be able to do up there. When I became an, when I became an astronaut, and the first thing you do, you get a lot of courses. They tell you a lot of things, what's going on in space, and so on, etc., and also medical courses. And one thing I learned during these courses was in Cologne, in European Astronaut Center, was that in space, quite a lot of people, actually, they see flashes, normally when they close their eyes. And the first one who reported this was Buzz Aldrin on Apollo 11. And it might be that people had seen it before, but they didn't dare to tell the doctors because they were afraid that the doctors think, haha, he's a crazy guy, we won't fly him again. But this was actually predicted already in 1952 that this could possibly happen. So this was the first flight, Apollo 11, when they went down and walked on the moon, and after that they actually asked the remaining Apollo astronauts to look for this, and all of them except one did see light flashes. This is a picture from the last time we've been on the moon, by the way, December 1972. So that's how long it is. Some brave scientists, you know, scientists are very brave, they put themselves in a beam, put their eye in front of the beam, and sure enough, they saw the same thing. So they have particles coming here. In this particular one, they have nitrogen, probably can't see it. They're trying various particles, helium, nitrogen, even pions, muons, and even neutrons. Well, and most of the times they could see it. So it kind of verified what people thought, that this was probably due to particles going through the eyes. And this is kind of how it was described, how it could look like. And still don't know really what is happening in the eye. It certainly is something to do with charged particle hitting the eye, but what? And here's some of the proposals in the literature at that time. Shrenkov light created when the particle goes through the eye and then goes faster than almost the water in here. You have direct retinal ionization. You react on the retina here somehow. You knock out proton, which maybe do something, or was even suggested you had scintillation in the islands. Some also thought it might be that you hit the nerve, the optical nerve, but some of these beam tests seem to actually indicate it was not that. So this kind of stimulated me to, I wanted to do some science while still being an astronaut. And I'm a particle physicist in the background, so this was particles doing something in the eye. For astronauts, seemed to be a good project to work on. So, together with my mentor and Professor Per Karlsson in Stockholm, contacted people he knew in Rome and in Moscow Engineering and Physics Institute in Russia, and constructed a little detector we kind of put in front of the eye to detect particles that go through the eye, and then we asked cosmonauts on the Mir space station to look for light flashes. And this is Sergei Yavdeev, who is the second most, the guy has collected or kind of accumulated the second most time in space of everybody. He's spent total 747 days in space and on the Mir space station, and he spent a lot of time looking for light flashes while wearing this instrument also. And we sent 2 apparatus up to Mir, we called the Sil Eye, and we're continuing on the International Space Station now. And this is the kind of rough idea how it looks. You have silicon strip detectors going in 2 directions, and the particle goes through it, and you get signals out of them, and you can then track it. And this the analog signal, you can also get an idea of what kind of particle it might be. So the idea was to see, how often does this happen? And you correlate it somehow with this detector and hope we can understand more. So I'm not going to go through all the results, but a few funny things. So this is all the locations on the map of the world. Here's the equator, and this is the Atlantic. And this, or every square here or mark is one light flash which has been seen, all in all 223. So you can see there's more on the higher latitudes, which is expected because you have more radiation coming in there, less shielded by the magnetic field around the Earth. This is the South Atlantic anomaly where the magnetic field goes fairly far low down. So the space station actually goes through the radiation belt. You have a lot of very high flux of particles there, mainly protons though. And with just the detector itself, we can study the flux of the relative flux of various particles. And this is higher and higher, heavier and heavier ions. And it's really ions without any electrons. And this is just a trigger rate, basically. And you see it's huge here in the South Atlantic anomaly. What did we learn? Well, we did learn with this Sil Eye from Mir that the probability to get a light flash increases with ionization particle. And this is, I'm not going to go into detail, but this is kind of how it shows. And LAT is how much ionization per length you do. In physics, we normally talk particles DDX. But in this kind of radiation, they normally like to use LAT instead. Some tracks where we actually able to really see there was a track coming in and hitting the eye, and we could identify which kind of particle it was. And there were all these cases ions, no protons. We found that was about 1% probability that the heavy ion, in this case heavy, is anything from helium upwards. If it goes through the eye, it's about 1% chance of giving light flash. Probability of protons is much smaller, factor 1,000 smaller almost. So what we believe is that the main thing happening is that there's a direct interaction with the retina, and while the protons probably induce a nuclear reaction. So the proton itself is probably not enough to interact with retina, but they may rather create a light flash by interacting with a heavy ion or hitting something and kicking out an alpha. So another study involved in is just a questionnaire. We asked a lot of flown current astronauts, and it turns out about 80% of the astronauts have seen it, so not everyone sees it. And many multipliers, people who flown several times have not seen it all the times, for example. You normally see it before sleep, so you need some light adaptation. But some, about 20% thought that they were so much that they even disturbed their sleep. And this might be a problem when you go outside the magnetic field which we have around the Earth. You will have much more of this when you go to the Moon or to Mars. So this work continues on space station. We have this, now we call it Altino or Sil Eye 3 on the space station. And it's also connected to a EEG to kind of get your brain waves. The idea is try to get some objective measurements of these light flashes. Altino with this EEG was a kind of precursor for the Altea, which I'll come back to. And, but this Altino is still there, now just taking radiation data, moving around different places. So when I was there, and I also told myself, when I went up there knowing that only at least 20% of the people have not seen it, I was a little bit worried, what if I don't see any light flash? I've been working with this for many years. So I was very glad when I did see light flash the first night, but after some dark adaptation. And it was the way that most had explained it. So we're moving this Altino around to see how different material in different places in the space station can create more or less radiation. And so we saw that one place, red one, has much more than another one, and even less in a Pierce module, which is the Russian airlock. And the interesting thing here is that you have less material feeding you to the outside on the Pierce module. So you really, sometimes you get more radiation inside if you have less material between the space and you. I'll come back to that later. We're also trying to put some shielding material in front of the detector and see how it helps. And the black is no shield and red is shield, and some difference, but not too much. It's very hard to protect yourself. And now, this is the Altea, the sleeping experiment I talked about. And it's a huge thing. We call it even facility. Came up a year ago now. And it's a complete helmet with detectors surrounding your head. And then you have an EEG coupled to it, and a push button, you push if you see light flash, and some other things. And it's a big collaboration. I'm going through, just want to tell you, it's actually run by Rome. They are the lead institute here. So this is how it looks like when you do it. Here's Sunny and Mike helping Sunny to get his helmet on, to get the EEG data, and then you put your head into all the inside these detectors to detect the particles goes through your head. And then she pushes a button every time she sees a light flash. Unfortunately, you only see about one light flash every 5 to 10 minutes, and it's individual. So I saw about 10, 12 when I was there for an hour, and sunny I did much less. But this is preliminary data. In addition to getting the data from the head, we also have around the eye, called electroretinal signal. And here was two cases actually, when they could see a particle which seemed to go through my eye, and they found on the data from my eye, that's about around 100 milliseconds, 150 to 100 to 200 milliseconds after that, there's a signal, which is what you can expect. In addition to doing this, we cannot now put people in the beams. That's not ethically anymore, not even if you put yourself, but you can put mice. So this Altea collaboration, some of them also done a project to put mice into a beam and see what happens. And then they compare this electrical signals from the retina and the head, light compared to ions, in this case carbon ions. And again, it's around 100 milliseconds after you expect this retinal signal. They did find that for the visual cortex, the signals from the ions are much slower than from the light. Well, I don't really know why that is. Well, these detectors which are there, which you put your head in, they are running all the time. So they take an enormous amount of data. And here is all the relative distribution of all the different ions all the way up to the iron peak. It's well known that there are more iron up there than many other heavy elements. This is from, in space. You also can see a solar flare. When we were up there during our stay, was actually a huge solar flare. What you see here, these peaks, that's when you go through this South Atlantic anomaly I was talking about, where you go through the belt of particles. So those orbits, you get the peaks. And each little wiggle here is one orbit. Because low, when you go to the equator, and high, you go to high latitudes. And then we had a solar flare, and the flux increased a lot. And so this is when we're on the side where the flash comes, and then go down on the other side of the Earth, you're shielded and up again. And this is data from another satellite, which looks all the time to the sun. And here you see how it goes up with a factor of 1,000. The different colors here are particles from the sun with different energy. And here is our first spacewalk. So just towards the end of our spacewalk, we got hit by this shower. And then again, during the second spacewalk, also we got another shower. It's kind of really timed it for us. However, it created very nice auroras. So that was the positive side of it. We had very beautiful auroras, and that was a little extra project I was working on, together with some scientists in Kiruna, tried to take photos of auroras. Actually, this lens I didn't use for the auroras, but that's showing how we take photos. Another thing we're working on, you measure really how big dose you get. You cannot do much about it, but it's good to know. Actually, it could be bad to know. If you get too much, the doctors will tell you, no, you're not allowed to fly again, because they limit how much radiation dose you're allowed to get in your lifetime. So, but this all has been done by NASA and the Russians, but thought we needed our own European dose meters. So we got a project started where now in Germany they build this, and it's various materials which you have to analyze afterwards. And since we now had some control of it, I actually brought up, well, this is to show there I carrying it, and this Thomas Wright, and he's carrying it, and we had one on our feet also. This was I was playing Frisbee in front of TV during a press conference. And because we now had some control of these dose meters, I asked to get many with me. So I had a couple of special ones, which I only used when I went out on spacewalk, because we thought we would have much higher dose. We were less shielded outside. Well, during the 3 EVAs, which I totaled 18.5 hours, about 5 to 6% of the total time in space. The preliminary result seems to be that there's no difference, actually. It was a little bit surprising, but might be reasons for that. I don't know if time to go through all these things. I mostly mentioned it anyhow. But what the summary is that maybe there are some concerns that all this, of course, can be dangerous to you. You know, if particles going through, it creates light flashes, maybe it's bad for your brain. So we need to study and understand this better when we're going back to the moon and eventually to Mars. And another project I've been involved in is try to get a program to calculate what the dose will be and to kind of see how to design better vehicles maybe. And since I came from the CERN, I knew the SHIANT, which is the program for simulating experiments for particle physicists. So got a PhD student who actually made a SHIANT model of the whole space station. And then in particular the European module, Columbus. So this is the European part to the space station. It's a laboratory. It will be launched toward the end of this year. And at that time, the space station will look roughly like this. And particularly, he modeled this one very carefully. For those of you who may know SHIANT, it's kind of 750 modules. And then he also made took a model of this radiation around the Earth and ran a lot of simulations, and then he could find kind of how the radiation looks different in different parts of the inside, depending on how much shielding you have in various places. And one interesting thing he found here, I kind of alluded to before, is if you have low energy particles. You see, we typically talk about two sources of radiation when you are around the Earth here. One is what we call the belt protons. These are the protons which are in this radiation belt, which we go through when in the South Atlantic anomaly. They are not very high energetic. Here's the energy, and here's the flux. This is what comes in, and this is what you have in the inside. He created 3 models of the Columbus to see, understand partly how detailed model he needed, but also gave the effect that this Columbus 1 has much less mass in it. And when you have little shielding, little mass, you get a higher dose with these belt protons, low energy. However, the other source, which is particles coming from outside the solar system, from the galaxy, they're much higher energy. This is the incoming distribution of them. In this case, this one, the one with low material, actually is less, which you might assume. So actually, you get higher dose when you have more mass shielding. Of course, if you put enough material in there, then you will get less again. But so for certain energy ranges of particles coming in, you would actually get higher doses for certain masses. So increased shielding, less dose, actually gets higher dose in some cases. So I'm coming to the end. I don't know, I see you start to look at me here. To conclude this whole thing, this is how the space station roughly will look like when it's done. It's halfway now. It's a laboratory, you can do science there, but really, I think its main purpose is it's really kind of stepping stone for man. So we can learn how to go further. And really now, at least in NASA, they already have put the next goal, the moon, around 2019, back to the moon. But even that is also only a next step, because they also say we will then go further to Mars, where so far we only have robots. And maybe in 25 years or so, and who knows, in the long future, maybe new words. So, voila. Did you time it? It was 40 minutes, right?
I invite you to for a few questions. We will also leave some time for questions from the audience. But what I mentioned in the beginning, I mean, it was really a surprise when you returned from CERN to Sweden, and then someday we discovered that you have become an astronaut. I mean, how come, I mean, how difficult is, I mean, it's a completely different field, and how did you come to the decision to change your career?
Well, yeah, I was, as I said, I was not many things could have tempted me away from science and then the research I did with particle physics at CERN. But I had this old kind of dream that if there ever was a chance to go to space, I certainly would at least try to take that chance. I wasn't really thinking about becoming a professional astronaut, but yeah, I want to try to go to space. So when this ad kind of was there, suddenly I had to try, for sure.
And it was obviously a great adventure.
Yeah, yes. That maybe I also had, I mean, many, if you don't know too much and you remember the Apollo days, you think all the astronauts are fighter pilots or something like that. But that's not true anymore. I would say maybe one-third to half, one-third maybe has that background, and then the rest is very variety. There are engineers, there are medical doctors, and there's quite a few scientists.
But this has changed probably recently, because I remember in, well, 10, 20, maybe 20, 25 years ago, all of the astronauts were more or less the
yeah, if you think 20 years ago,
pilots.
it's recently, yeah. It's probably kind of, it's changed, maybe even 25 years ago. NASA changed, or started to employ scientists and things like that, to, I mean, more bigger scale when they started to fly the shuttle regularly, so in the early 80s. More or less.
When we were looking your video, I mean, how you were enjoying the zero gravity, what's the experience? I mean, must be...
Yeah, it's hard to describe, and it's certainly extremely, it's funny. A really enormous feeling to just float around, and it's a little bit if you've been in water. I mean, you just float around, but still in the water, you better make sure your head is above the water. But or if you're diving, you can have this maybe even more feeling for it. But you still always feel what's up and down, and if you're really diving, you have all this gear. There you just float around. Sometimes you wish you had the gravity, because I mean, it's hard to keep yourself in place if you don't have to strap down or hold to something. And, it's, if you want to keep things on a place also, you always have to, you have a lot of Velcro to put things on, or straps, but you lose things easier, because it tends to just float away.
Is this feeling also connected to the fact that you don't have a preference direction in the space, that you don't know where it's up, down, left, right, and then...
Yeah, that's harder. You can easily get disoriented. And for example, during the spacewalks, in the pool, even if you're balanced, you can move in any direction without problems. You always feel what's down. You always have the light. While in the real spacewalk, you don't feel anything, which direction anything is. And every 45 minutes is nighttime, and then it's daytime. It's only 90 minutes to go around the orbit. And you can easily be working and without realizing, kind of swinging your body. So what was back home there, you suddenly is, well, there instead. So you can get disoriented. What helps you then is, though, that you always have a safety tether. And safety tether is always back home. So that's kind of connected towards the direction of the lab, but you sometimes need to, before you move, you maybe better stop and look around and think before just heading away where you thought it was you want to go.
You mentioned me, I think yesterday, that returning back to the Earth, it's not that obvious. I mean, the effect of the gravity, again,
it's surprising how quickly your body forgets gravity. So. We were up there, I said, a little bit less than 13 days, and coming down in the shuttle, even before we had much gravity, you start to feel heavy, and start to do head movements, it really spins. So, and then when we landed, and I had to stand up immediately because I'd lost something I needed to find, I felt very heavy, and my balance was really off. But you recovered, I thought, after 3 days, my balance was completely recovered, and then there was some other minor effects.
But these people, like the Russian guy who stayed in the I think it was on the Mir station for 2 years. I mean, the effect must be quite.
Yeah,
positive.
actually, he wasn't 2 years in a row. That was 2 or
okay.
3.
So
But he did stay 1 year once. So it's two times half year, 1 year, 1 year. Once 1 year. That's a bit. Yeah, the doctors here, they have a rule of thumb. They say 1 day in space, you need 1 day to recover. So I mean, to full recover. So for me, it was about 2 weeks. I felt okay after 1 week, but probably it's minor effects, maybe another week. But if you for a year, what is I think the effect which needs the longest time to recover is that you lose a lot of bone. The bone gets demineralized, like the osteoporosis. And fast. I mean, the lower bones could be as much as 1% per month, and even more. And still not a very good countermeasure been found, and it takes time to recover that.
Okay, I think before we leave time to the audience, just one question. You mentioned the moon. We know that the last flight to the moon was more than 30 years ago, and there are plans to start the project to visit the Mars. Do you think that's realistic, and where do you see you in this story?
I wish I could go to the moon, but it's probably not realistic. But the plan is that the shuttle will be used to complete building the space station, and that's right now it's supposed to be in the middle of 2010. And then we don't use the shuttle anymore. It's partly getting old, and it will cost a lot to kind of recertify it. It's been shown to be not too safe, and it's not very robust. I mean, you cannot launch every day because weather is bad and things like that. So the NASA has they are already planning to build the next generation spaceship, which to some people are disappointing because it's not even more flashy than this. It's more like an Apollo capsule, but bigger. It will be able to take 6 people to the space station to start with, and later 4 people to the moon. But they will be different from the moon rockets, such that you don't launch everything at once. You will launch people on one rocket, but it's called Orion capsule on top. And it will be reusing quite a lot of the shuttle rocketry for that, the booster, for example, boosters, and some engines. And then you have built a much bigger rocket, like Saturn V, to launch all the other things you need to go to the moon, and then you dock them in orbit, and then you go to the moon. And that same capsule is also thought of that they will eventually use that as the part to go into the Mars.
Okay, I think we should now ask questions from the audience. Professor Plesničar, wait for the microphone. They will bring you the microphone.
Sir, if I understood correctly, the doses of ionizing radiation the body is getting up in the skies is quite considerable. Should it be ionizing radiation or particles like proton, neutron? On the other side, I have seen that you are wearing the dosimeters. Have you figures about how much is the total doses, let me say, per day or during the whole trip some astronaut is getting during the trip?
The question of how much dose I get per day? Yeah. I think
outside.
I don't have my personal numbers yet, but roughly the rate up there is about 50 times higher than on ground, on the sea level ground. So I mean that's the best comparison to do. That is 50 times. You get in 1 week in orbit, you get about the same as you get in 1 year on the living on Earth. Yeah.
So the people did never accuse something which would be connected. I mean, as a human body, something which would be connected as effect or considered as effect of ionizing radiation. No.
No, sorry, I didn't understand the question really.
No, I mean they were exposed. Yeah. The astronauts.
Yeah.
They're up. in the sky.
The particles.
Yeah, the body, their body. And nobody accused something, let us say, some sort of malaise or bad feeling or whatever it is, which symptoms which could be connected with exposure to rays.
The only effect which there are some indications about, which has been seen, is cataracts. There is actually somewhat strong indication that astronauts have been in space and more in space have a somewhat higher incidence of cataracts in the lenses than people who have not flown. And it's not strange because the lenses is one of the most sensitive organs for radiation. And then that's actually something which they did. So they did one preliminary study, it seemed to indicate that, and now there is ongoing and much more detailed study will be run for some years.
Other questions? Yes, please. Is there a microphone somewhere? Or?
Thank you very much. You told us a lot about sensation and the impact on the human being, on the body when you are in the gravity. You think it's possible for a man, a human being from the Earth, to live one day on these planets or on the moon? Thank you.
Yes. First, talking about weightlessness, the longest someone has been up is 14.5 months, and yeah, it's hard when you get back. Now, when you're on the moon or on Mars, you do have gravity there, of course, although it's reduced. I mean, it's 1/6 on the moon and 1/3 on Mars. For real long future, if you want to fly to another sun or something like that, I imagine that we will create some kind of all space cities, more or less, which will be on like torus things, and you spin it and you get some internal gravity. And some people think that we should do that all going to Mars, but not then a complete torus, but you may have this little vehicle for the people, and then you need some other stuff with you anyhow, and you connect them by wire, and you can just get it to spin around. Yeah. And you don't need the full 1G. I mean, the 1/3 would be certainly enough, because you go to Mars, and that's 1/3. And when you come back, well, you have people to help to take care of you. So I don't think that would be a problem. I think the bigger problem is the radiation, because when you go outside the shield of the magnetic field, right now we are mainly inside it with the space station, you get much more radiation, and just putting material, it's not easy to shield you with more material.
Please.
Half of your presentation was talking about the research of light flashes you performed on the space station. Could you describe us a little bit what the experience of seeing a light flash is like? What precisely do you see when there's a light flash?
Yeah.
In simple words, not in physics terminology, please.
Yes. I had to wait maybe 15 minutes or so after I closed my eyes before I saw some. But it's like just a little quick flash. I mean, there are various. Some is like a point, like if someone would just quickly switch on and off a light bulb way there if you're looking there. Sometimes there are more like a streak, line, let's say. One time I actually saw two at the same time. Like, you can imagine like it's going in on one side and out on the other side. I don't know if that's true, but it was like that. To me, they were all white. Some people say that they seem to see some color in there, yellowish, for example, bluish. Some people say they seem like it seems to them like it's moving. It's like, I mean, you have a line, but you even see motion in it. And, well, you may think that, yes, a particle will go through there, so, yeah, of course you can see a movement, but really, these things go so fast that they go more or less the speed of light. It's less than a nanosecond to go through the eye, so that's not possible. There must be some other physiological explanation to why it seems like a motion. Normally, I did not have that experience, but quite a lot. So mainly to me, it was either just white dot, sometimes dot with a weak halo, or a line, but not through the whole vision, just part of the vision.
More questions, please.
Yeah, maybe it's really a stupid question, but
No.
if you're on a high building or on a high mountain, you are afraid to fall down. Where is this point that you stopped to have this feeling?
To fall off the space station?
Yes.
Yeah, when you do spacewalk, quite a lot of people get that feeling, and there are people who, I mean, they are, I don't know, afraid, but concerned. They grab on the handrail so hard all the time that they exhaust the power in their hands within an hour. One colleague of me who flew a few shuttles before me, he said after 1 hour he was so tired in his hands he didn't know he would be able to do the whole work. I mean, normally you're there for 6 hours. So I made a very conscious decision that I'm not going to do that. I would really think about it, and I sometimes was really floating along the side of the station, but I was never far from it.
The feeling of the missing gravity is helping there, or?
Say again?
You don't feel gravity, so this is helping you. It's something that you have to think up, that you will not fall to the earth.
Well, yeah, it's a rational thinking, but because another friend of mine who had made this spacewalk flight before, he said that sometimes when he saw the ground, he got the feeling of falling because the ground is passing below you with a fairly high speed, actually. So he said he could get that feeling somewhat, and then he just concentrated back on the space station. And I was, again, lucky. I never really had that kind of feeling. But also made this conscious decision to, logically thinking, I know I'm floating here, and I don't...
So
it's
during the
illusion.
spacewalk you are not connected to at all, or
Well,
you can
yes,
clamp
you always have a safety tether.
Okay.
Actually, so you have a couple of safety levels. So first of all, you use your hand to move around. It's called a space walk, but really you use your hands, more as climbing. And then when you are at the place where you need to work, you have either a short line from here, or you have a metallic thing on the side with a clamp on, or sometimes you're in a foot restraint.
Okay.
So but then you have a safety tether, which is always connected.
It's connected to the module or whatever.
Yeah, and that has a reel, so it's very long, but it's not long enough, so you need to change if you go to the very end. But that's if you fly off, I mean, you may be 20 meters out before this stops and slowly pull you down.
Put it back in.
Now, if even that will fail, on the back of your spacesuit, you have a kind of packet called mini rockets. Really, it's high-pressure nitrogen gas with 4 small rockets.
So a small booster.
And you can get your little joystick out, like a real spaceman or a computer game, and then you can fly yourself back. It was tempting to use it, but...
Yes, Florence, please.
Yeah, usually, probably you have problems how to store CO2, or where do you get oxygen on the space shuttle during your trip to the space.
How we do with the gases, kind of?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a big science. So on the space shuttle, we have liquid oxygen, which we bring up. And we have a lot, because the main reason they're used for is to create electricity. So we have liquid oxygen, liquid hydrogen, put them together through fuel cells, and we get electricity and water. So, and then we take a little bit of oxygen for the air. And actually that water we later give to the space station, who do the opposite. They have electricity from the solar panels, and they you do an electrolysis on the water, and they get oxygen out of the water, which they then use to breathe. The carbon dioxide, which we create when we breathe, we get rid of on the shuttle with canisters using LiOH, LiOH, and they just absorb it, and you have to change it every day. So that's one limiting factor, actually, how long you can stay up. On the space station, you have another system which is you can regenerate it, so you don't it's not consumable, which you need to throw away. You absorb, and then you heat it up, and then you get rid of the carbon dioxide, throw it out into the space, and you can reuse it. So.
Okay, I think we can take one more question if urgent. Please.
I'm interested why the landing is manual, not by computer or, I don't know, anything else.
Because it's not good enough, the computer, for that. I would say that's the reason. They have, in principle, the shuttle is equipped with an auto landing system. And they did try it once, but it started to kind of oscillate in a way that the commander on board at that time didn't dare to continue the automatic, so he took it manual. And since then, in tests, it hasn't behaved too well, so you can keep it. Interesting, though, that the Russians actually made a similar space shuttle called Buran. And they flew it in the late 80s, once unmanned. It was not still equipped for everything you need to keep people on board. But if it flew, they launched it, they flew around Earth, and it made a perfect automatic landing. But they didn't have money to continue that program.
Okay, I think we will continue the discussion afterwards. There will be plenty of time. You are all welcome to stay, to talk to Christer. But before we end this ceremony, I think all of you know that during Christer's stay at the International Space Station, our Senate, the Senate of the University of Nova Gorica, decided to honor Christer with a Doctor Honoris Causa for his contribution to science and to human space flights. And I have the great honor today, Christer, to confer to you the diploma.
Thank you.
And also this
Doctor Honoris Causa. Whoops.
Hey. Just
thank you.
Put it on it.
Put it down there? Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. So thank you. So the owl in Slovenia is a symbol of wisdom.
Yeah, in Sweden
and
also.
I'm pretty sure you will need it on your next flights to the space. Thanks again, and if you want to say a word or two,
like
you're
to,
welcome.
Thank you very much, Danilo, and everybody else in the University of Nova Gorica, and all the others who are here, and to the representative and our ambassador. And I wish you the very best luck with your very young university, that you will grow and be a well-known university soon, in not only in Slovenia but in Europe as a whole. And for a space flight, I hope that Slovenia soon will join forces with ESA somehow. I know that ESA is interested, I think Slovenia is interested, but I know that our Director General will come here soon and start discussions, I think. And looking forward to a Slovenian-born and not only heritage astronaut up in space in 10 to 20 years or so.
Thank you very much, Christer, for your good wishes, and you are now part of our university.
Thank you.
Thanks again.
Thank you.